again, we'll be in Matthew chapter 6, looking at the section verses 1 through 18, where Christ addresses the subject of spiritual duties. He speaks of three specific duties: good deeds, verses 1 through 4. We looked at that last week. Prayer, verses 5 through 15. And then fasting in verses 16 through 18. The life that is presented and illustrated in the Sermon on the Mount is the Christian life. It's the life that we are called to live. And this life does involve duty. There are many duties in the Christian life. A duty implies expectation from another. And there is expectation from God. Duty implies certain acts. Duty implies that certain operations are expected. Duty, of course, implies responsibility. And duty implies accountability. A lot of people would like to do away with responsibility and accountability in the Christian life, but you can't. It's there. We have specific duties. Duty implies that there is a purpose. Duty is conduct that is due. Conduct that is due. Conduct that is due to God. It's tasks. It's functions that arise from our position because of who we are, what we've been made. There are certain tasks that arise from that. Duty is an assigned service. Becomes an obligation. We have obligations to God. That's true whether a person's saved or not. As the creature, they have an obligation to the Creator. For those that are saved, of course, there are obligations. You don't lose your salvation if you fail in some obligations, but there are obligations. The Christian life that we're called to live, again, involves personal duties. Notice in Ecclesiastes chapter 12. Ecclesiastes chapter 12. This verse basically is a summation of what it's all about. Ecclesiastes 12, verse 13. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. The conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God. Reverence God. Keep His commandments. Reverence God. Keep His commandments. This is the whole duty of man. That's it. That's what it's all about. Reverence God. Keep His commandments. That's our duty. It doesn't cease when one is saved. That's still our duty. We don't keep His commandments to be saved, but it's still our duty to obey. Notice in Luke 17, with that in mind, keep His commandments. Luke 17 and verse 10. So likewise ye, when ye shall have done all those things which are commanded you. Nobody's done that, but say you did. We are unprofitable servants. We have done that which was our duty to do. It's our duty to keep the commandments or obey. So duty is obedience to the Lord. And the Christian life, the life that we are called to live, the life that is presented here in the Sermon on the Mount, involves obedience. Notice in Deuteronomy 26. Deuteronomy 26, verse 16. This day the Lord thy God hath commanded thee to do these statutes and judgments. Thou shalt therefore keep and do them with all thy heart, with all thy soul. We're to obey God with all our heart, with all our soul. 1 Samuel chapter 15, verse 22. 1 Samuel 15, verse 22. And Samuel said, "If the Lord has great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices, as in obeying the voice of the Lord. Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to hearken than the fat of rams." So, obedience is of great importance in the life that we're called to live. Now, many would say, well, that's legalism. No, they don't know what they're talking about. It would be legalism if we said you have to keep the commandments to be saved. That's legalism. You have to keep the commandments to continue to be saved. That's legalism. The Bible teaches obedience. You cannot get around that. And really it comes down to what Mary said to the servants at the wedding of Cana. John 2 and verse 5, she said, "Whatsoever he saith unto you, do it." And that's pretty much it. Whatever he says, do it. So the Christian life involves obedience to God. That's our duty. The Christian life is not void of the duty of obedience. In every aspect, in every realm of our lives, in every circumstance, we are to believe and we are to practice that it is God's right to command us. God has that right. Why? Because He's God. Therefore, He has that right. And we must believe and practice the justness of God's commands. Whatever He says to do is right. And we must believe and practice that it is our responsibility to obey. And again in Matthew 6, verses 1 through 18, Christ addresses 3 specific duties. Almsgiving, good deeds, good works. Really, you could put all the duties under that one. Then there's prayer and there's fasting. All of these are to be a part of the life that we live. Now, last week we looked at good works, and as you read Matthew 6 there, you see that he proceeds by giving several warnings. And that's what we want to look at tonight. The life that we're called to live involves duties. However, the life that we are called to live goes beyond performance. A lot of times, as soon as you say the word duties, immediately people start talking about, well, we've got to perform those things. So we're talking about something that goes beyond performance. And I believe that's what Jesus is warning against here in this section. That our service to God doesn't just become a performance. Christianity is more, so much more than a performance. So again, Matthew 6, let's read verses 1 through 5. Take heed that you do not your alms before men to be seen of them. That's a warning. Otherwise you have no reward of your Father which is in heaven. Therefore, when thou doest thine alms, again it's assumed that you will, do not sound a trumpet before they, do not call attention to yourself, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may have the glory of men. This is why they call attention to themselves, that they may have the glory of men. Verily I say unto you, they have their reward. But when thou doest alms, let not thy left hand know what thy right hand doeth, that thine alms may be in secret, and thy Father which seeth in secret himself shall reward thee openly. And when thou prayest, thou shalt not be as the hypocrites are. For they love to pray, standing in the synagogues and in the corners of the streets, that they may be, there it is again, that they may be seen of men. Verily I say unto you, they have their reward. Then in verse 7, but when ye pray, use not vain repetitions as the heathen do, for they think that they shall be heard for their much speaking. In other words, they think they'll be rewarded by performing. Verse 8, be not ye therefore like unto them, for your Father knoweth what things ye have need of, before ye ask him. And then down in verses 16 to 18. Moreover, when ye fast, be not as the hypocrites of a sad countenance, for they disfigure their faces, and here it is again, that they may appear unto men to fast. Verily I say unto you, they have their reward. But thou, when thou fastest, anoint thine head, and wash thy face, that thou appear not unto men to fast, but unto thy Father which is in secret, and thy Father which seeth in secret shall reward thee openly. So in each of these duties, good works, prayer, fasting, in each of these duties, Christ addresses, he gives warning to his own concerning these duties. And it's basically the same warning in each duty. And by giving warning, what he's saying is, you are more than the religious crowd. And by warning, he's also giving rebuke to the religious crowd. Now, a warning speaks of a dangerous possibility. If there was no possibility, no need for a warning. So a danger immediately implies a possibility regarding the child of God. And everything that he warns against, God's people are very prone to do. And are things that we are very likely to fall prey to. Therefore, he gives warning. Again, the warnings are introduced in verse 1 by those two words, take heed. Take heed. Those two words stress the seriousness of the matter. Take heed. That is a call to give diligent consideration, diligent attention to the matter that he speaks of. To be vigilant in watching against what Christ is warning against. Due to our sinful flesh, due to the fact of Satan, due to the course of the world, we must be on guard at all times against these things that he's speaking of. So let's look at the warnings. Verse 1, there is a warning about doing things to be seen. Take heed that you do not your alms before men. That is not a prohibition against being seen, having that your good works are seen. Someone sees you do a good work, so be it. It doesn't say here, take heed that you do not your alms before men, period. It's not what it is. It's comma. There's a comma. To be seen. That's the reason you do them. That's what he's rebuking. If you do a good deed for the purpose of being seen, that's what he's warning against. Contrary to say, well, people are not to see our good works. Well, Matthew 5:16 runs contrary to that because we have those words to be seen of them, that they may glorify your Father. It's the motive behind the good work. We're not to do something to be seen. We may do something and be seen, that doesn't make it wrong. But if we do it to be seen, it's wrong. It's wrong. That becomes what? That's a performance. That's what the person is doing. So to be seen of men, that states the purpose, the motive behind the good deed. When we do a good work, we need to be sure that our purpose of doing the work is pure, our motive is pure, that it's for the glory of God. That's what he's warning against. The same is repeated in verse 5 regarding prayer. And when thou prayest, thou shalt not be as the hypocrites are, for they love to pray, standing in the synagogues and in the corners of the streets, that they may be seen. Now, there's nothing wrong with praying in the synagogue. There's nothing wrong with praying in the street. If you feel a need to pray, pray. But you don't do it to be seen. You don't do it to be seen. That's true if you're in a restaurant. There's nothing wrong with praying in a restaurant. You don't have to pray so loud that everyone in the restaurant hears you. Then your motive is wrong because you're doing it to be heard. You're doing it to be seen. So you have that warning when it comes to good works. You have that warning when it comes to prayer. And again in verse 16, you see it with regards to fasting. Moreover, when you fast, be not as the hypocrites of a sad countenance, for they disfigure their faces, and here's why, that they may appear unto men to fast. So you see, all of that boils down to a performance. Why do they want to appear unto man to fast? It's a desire for affirmation. It's a desire for applause. It's a desire for praise, to be thought highly of. Christ says, don't do that. Don't do that. Don't do something to be seen. Don't do something for adulation. You do it for God's glory. Next, there is a warning about being a hypocrite. In verse 2, do not as the hypocrites do. And in verse 5, shall not be as the hypocrites are. And in verse 8, be not ye like unto them. And in verse 16, be not as the hypocrites. So these are warnings that serve also as a rebuke against hypocrisies and being a hypocrite. The hypocrite is what? The hypocrite is an actor, a stage performer, one who plays a part. That's a hypocrite. It is a pretending. It is assuming a false appearance. It's in all of us by nature, hypocrisy. Hypocrites are everywhere. Hypocrites are not just in church. They're everywhere. Everybody's a hypocrite to some degree. Everybody. Everybody has hypocrisies. And Christ is warning against this. In Luke chapter 12, keep a mark there, but in Matthew, but in Luke chapter 12, and verse 1. In the meantime, when there were gathered together an innumerable multitude of people, insomuch that they trode one upon another, he began to say unto his disciples, first of all, beware. Again, if the possibility doesn't exist in them, there's no need to tell them to beware. But the possibility does exist. So he says, beware ye of the leaven of the Pharisees. Someone might say, well, what is that? He tells them, which is hypocrisy. So he calls hypocrisy here leaven. And what that means is it spreads. It increases until it infects and corrupts the whole. There is such a thing as habitual hypocrisy. People can live a lie long enough where in their mind it's true. I mean, in their mind they're not being a hypocrite. They've been doing it so long, they actually believe it. Just like you can tell a lie. You tell it enough, you'll believe it. No one else may, but you will. And you actually believe it's the truth. Again, Christ warns against the sin of hypocrisy with regard to good works, prayer, and fasting. So what that means is hypocrisy can infect everything we do in the Lord's service. And hypocrisy in all of its forms is rejected by God. God always rejects hypocrisy. Again, we've referred to it several times here in the last couple of weeks. Read Isaiah chapter 1, verses 10 through 14. Notice also in Isaiah 29, regarding that, Isaiah 29, verses 13 through verse 15. Wherefore the Lord said, for as much as this people draw near me with their mouth, and with their lips do honor me. Someone says, well, that's great. But, there's a problem. But have removed their heart far from me. They say the right things, but their heart is far from God. And their fear toward me is taught by the precept of men. That is, you do what we're doing, you're right with God. Verse 14, therefore, behold, I will proceed to do a marvelous work among this people, even a marvelous work and a wonder. For the wisdom of their wise men shall perish, and the understanding of their prudent men shall be hid. Woe unto them that seek deep to hide their counsel from the Lord. And their works are in the dark, and they say, who seeth us, and who knoweth us? Hypocritical living is exhausting. It's exhausting. This is why so many of God's people are miserable. It is why they're so spiritually tired, because hypocrisy is exhausting. It will wear you out. You won't be able to do anything. It's exhausting. Christ is warning against this. It leads to vain effort. There in Matthew 6, verse 7, they think by their vain repetition they shall be heard. Hypocrisy is vanity. It amounts to nothing. It's rejected by God. So in this section of the Sermon on the Mount, Christ is warning against a mere performance-based service to the Lord. That's what the hypocrites do. In the mind of the Pharisee, serving the Lord was a performance. And Christ is warning against that mindset. The life we're called to live, the life presented and illustrated in the Sermon on the Mount, it's about the Lord. It's all about Him. And hypocrisy arises when we turn the Lord's work to be about us. Now you have hypocrisy. It's not about us. It is about the Lord. There is also a warning, Matthew 6, about calling attention to ourselves. He says in verse 2, with regard to good deeds, do not sound the trumpet before thee. The purpose of them sounding the trumpet was that they may have glory of men. That's not why we're to serve God, that we may have glory of men. And in verse 5, when thou prayest, thou shalt not be as hypocrites are, for they love to pray, standing in the synagogues and in the corners of the streets. And again, there's nothing wrong with standing to pray. Some people say, oh, you shouldn't stand to pray. It says that right there. That's not what it says. Look at the reason they're standing, that they may be seen of men. That's the problem right there, that they may be seen of men. In other words, they take great measures to make themselves visible. They take great measures in doing this. This is why these people, they're not hard to identify. You can almost identify them as soon as they walk in the door. They don't have to say anything. There's a look about them. But that's another subject. But this is why they get offended so easily. They make all this effort to be recognized, and if you fail to recognize them and treat them as special, they're immediately offended. They never serve God because they're offended most of the time, because it's all about them. The calling attention to themselves, someone will say, well, I have that problem, I'm going to stop. No, you're not. Not unless you take care of the root problem, which is pride. You're not going to take care of hypocrisy until you take care of pride and self-righteousness. Pride and self-righteousness. And that's what the Lord is warning against. There is a warning about a rewards-based perspective in all of these things. The word reward here in Matthew 6, in our text verses, occurs 7 times. Verse 1, verse 2, verse 4, verse 5, verse 6, verse 16, verse 18. 7 times you have the word reward. Now, the Pharisees, they had a reward-based perspective. They did what they did in the service of the Lord for reward. Whether it was to be seen of men, and then when men would see him, Jesus says, you have your reward. You got it right there. You do something for the applause of men, and men applaud you, there's your reward. Everything they did, they had this perspective, a reward. In other words, what's in it for me? They did what they did because they believed that the Lord would recompense them and that they would receive good in return for the good that they did. Again, verse 7. Think that they shall be heard for their much speaking. If I say it enough times, the Lord will reward me by hearing me. That's a wrong perspective. And where does that come from? Well, it comes from a spirit of self. It comes from a spirit of self-righteousness. It comes from a spirit of personal merit. If I do this, then I deserve this. It's an entirely wrong perspective in the service of the Lord. And it's a skewed basis of motivation in the service of the Lord. These people, they will say something like this: I served the Lord for 10 years. And the Lord took my child, I'll never serve him again. Or the Lord did, and I lost my job. I'll never go back to church. I did that for 10 years, and that's what happened. You've just made an announcement that you're a hypocrite. You just made an announcement that all your service was based upon you and what you thought you should get. It's a wrong perspective. It's an entirely wrong perspective. A reward-based system. That might work at your place of employment, but we're not talking about a place of employment. We're talking about service to God. Now, having said all that, the Bible does teach that God does reward faithfulness to him. And that is implied here in Matthew 6, verse 1. Otherwise ye have no reward of your Father, which is in heaven. God does reward faithfulness. It's also declared in verse 4, and thy Father which seeth in secret himself shall reward thee openly. It is declared in verse 6, thy Father which seeth thee in secret shall reward thee openly. And it's declared again in verse 18, the last part of verse 18. God does reward faithfulness. We're not denying that. That is a biblical truth. But that's not the reason that you and I are to serve God. That's not the reason that we obey God. We are to faithfully fulfill our duties to God because He's God, not because of what we think we should get. But a person who operates on a rewards-based system, they already have in their mind what the reward should be. And guess what? If God doesn't meet what they have already determined is their reward, they're very upset. These people, you can't keep them happy. I mean, it's just not going to happen. If they're happy through a whole day, that's pretty miraculous. They're a mess. Their perspective is skewed. Everything, and their thinking, everything is wrong. So the warnings that Christ gives in this portion of the sermon are in reality warnings against our depraved nature. These are things we all do. They are warnings against the tendencies that are due to our nature. He addresses the subject of alms, prayers, and fasting. All good things. All good things. Yet we can be active in good in a bad way. We can do that. Well, there's nothing wrong with prayer. No, there isn't. Prayer is a good thing, but you can do it wrong. You can do doing good works wrong, and that's what he's warning against. Because of our nature, we can take that which is good and ruin it. That's who we are. That's what we do many times. Man has the innate ability to take duties toward God and remove God from the duty and make it all about them. And that's what Christ is warning against. So we need, he's warning against performance-based service, which tells us that our life must be properly based. Everything we do must be properly based. Again, the life that's being illustrated here is the Christian life. Christianity does involve very specific duties. Christianity involves specific beliefs. You can't be a Christian and deny Christ or deny God. Christianity involves particular beliefs. That means that Christianity involves a certain way of thinking. Christianity, I'm not saying this is necessary to be saved. We're talking about Christianity, the Christian life. Christianity has biblical convictions. Christianity embraces certain truths. Christianity follows biblical rules. Christianity believes in assembling in church capacity. Christianity believes in reading and hearing the Scripture. Christianity believes in prayer. Christianity is for certain things and against certain things. But having said all of that, none of those things by themselves define Christianity. They're all involved in Christianity. But none of them, not one of them defines Christianity. Christianity is so much more. And though these things cannot be separated from Christianity, they're not the identity of a Christian. Man by nature is prone to be religious. That's why man has a problem with idolatry. Man is prone to be religious. And Christ addressed that in Matthew 5, verse 20. Man is prone to be performance-oriented. Man is prone to be performance or works-based seeking. Seeking validation. Seeking affirmation. you take an individual that is, by their religious performance, is seeking personal validation and affirmation, and you remove that from them, you've upset their whole life. You've greatly offended them. They're going to get angry. They're not coming back because you have removed what they're living for. It's what validates them. It's what makes them who they are. And when you take away performance out of Christianity, a lot of people can't tolerate that because that's what it's been their whole life, is a performance. Christ is rebuking that. The life that the Lord has called us to live, though it is essentially an acting out, it is an acting out, but it's an acting out what grace has put within. It's not a mere acting out. That's a performance. That's a performance. And that's what Christ so sharply rebukes and corrects in this portion of the sermon. The Lord is saying, I'm not interested in your performance. I have no interest in your performance. Through the years in churches, I have heard people, they're very good singers, but they're performers. They're performers. Well, how do you know that? Well, when you spend 6 weeks practicing for one special, you're performing. I'm sorry. Doesn't have to be perfect. Doesn't have to be perfect. And I've heard people that sing as bad as me or worse, believe it or not. But I believe the Lord was glorified. Christianity is not performance. It's fulfilling a duty. You think about a performer. They perform on a stage. Sadly, church is the stage for many, for them to perform. They perform on a stage to please crowds, but the reason they want to please crowds is for applause, for self. And they find affirmation and they find validation in their performance. And they are publicly identified as a performer. But if you keep up with all with, not saying you should, with the entertainment industry, off stage, they can be a completely different person. Completely different. Not even the same person. They're play acting on a stage. That's a performer. That's what a performer does. There's no place for it in Christianity. A performer knows how to live, how to act by the rules when they are on stage, when they are in the spotlight. But when they're by themselves, it might be a completely different person. We've all, well, perhaps known of some. Person could be a member of a church, be a pedophile. And when it comes out, everybody's shocked. That's because they put on a good performance. They're a good actor. And those kind of things happen all the time. No place for it in God's service. No place for it. And we see Christianity, Colossians 2, verse 6 and 7, we got to stop here, comes down to a reception of Jesus Christ. And corresponding to the reception of Christ is a walk in Him. And then he goes on to say, there in Colossians 2, 6 and 7, that it is a life with roots to Jesus Christ. That's Christianity. It is a life with roots to Jesus Christ. Roots are a structure that serves to anchor the plant to the life source. Our lives are to be anchored to Christ. And that's where we receive our nourishment as well. Christianity is never to be a performance. Everything in the Sermon on the Mount is none of it is performance-based. It is all Christ. Christ is to be the substance, the nature, the center, and the meaning of our life. It's not about us. It's about Him. It's Christ being the controlling and dominating influence of our life. It's Christ being the object of our life, Christ being the purpose of our life, Christ being the passion of our life, Christ being the goal and the aim of life. It is a life with roots to a real and personal experience of Jesus Christ. A life motivated by Christ to obey and be faithful in our duty, and not a mere performance. So Christianity is a Christ-based mindset, not a performance showing how Christian I am or how righteous I am. The Lord has no interest in you and I showing how righteous we are. The Lord's interest is for you and I to just obey and to manifest Him. And that's Christianity. So Christian life is a transformation from inside out. It's basically a duplication of the life of Christ. The life that Christ lived on earth, we're to duplicate it. We're to manifest that life. It's not about what others may think. It's not about adulation. It's not about our own personal insecurities being fulfilled or soothed, whatever. That's not what it's about. It's all about Christ. So as we look at this, we'll be going into prayer next, the subject of prayer. It's all about Him. It's not performance-based. It's not a performance. It's Him. That He might receive all the honor and all the glory. Brother Ben, if you'll come and lead us